Barry Gibb's story begins on September 1, 1946, when he was born Barry Allen Crompton Gibb in Douglas on the Isle of Man. From the very beginning, there was something unique about him. His family quickly noticed that music was not just a pastime. For Barry, it was a gift. By the time he was a child, he was already experimenting with melodies, harmonies, and rhythms that seemed to come naturally. His parents encouraged this talent, and soon enough, the Gibb household was filled with the sounds of young Barry strumming on a guitar or singing with his brothers. When Barry was still very young, his family moved to Manchester, England, and later emigrated to Australia in the late 1950s. It was in Australia that the seeds of the Bee Gees were truly planted. Alongside his younger brothers Robin and Maurice, Barry began performing at small community events, local clubs, and on radio shows. The boys were barely teenagers, yet they had an extraordinary ability to harmonize with one another. What began as childhood fun quickly transformed into a serious pursuit, with the Gibb brothers driven by both passion and a desire to create a future through music. In those early days, success was far from guaranteed. The Australian music scene was modest compared to what was happening in the United States or Britain, but Barry's determination and leadership gave the group an edge. He naturally assumed the role of the band's frontman and chief songwriter, penning songs that reflected his deep sensitivity and emotional insight even at such a young age. The Bee Gees' early performances were raw and energetic, but it was their tight harmonies that drew audiences in. There was a magic in the way their voices blended together, and people noticed. By the mid-1960s, the Gibb brothers began gaining traction in Australia. They earned television appearances, released local singles, and built a loyal following. But Barry always thought bigger. He knew that if the group was going to achieve true international success, they would need to leave Australia and head back to the United Kingdom, where the music industry was thriving during the British invasion era. In 1967, Barry, Robin, and Maurice made the bold move to return to England with the support of their father, Hugh Gibb, who acted as their manager. This decision would change the course of their lives forever. Once in London, the Bee Gees were introduced to producer Robert Stigwood, who quickly recognized their immense potential. Under his guidance, the group released their first international album, and almost overnight, the Bee Gees went from relative unknowns to one of the most promising acts in the industry. Barry's songwriting shined brightly on tracks like "To Love Somebody" and "New York Mining Disaster 1941", songs that revealed a level of sophistication far beyond their years. These early hits proved that Barry and his brothers were not just teenage pop singers, but serious artists with the ability to connect deeply with listeners around the world. Throughout the late 1960s, the Bee Gees continued to climb the charts. They quickly earned comparisons to the Beatles for their melodic strength and vocal harmonies. Though Barry was determined to carve out a distinct identity for the group, he experimented constantly with musical styles, pushing the boundaries of pop and rock while staying true to the group's signature sound. His falsetto voice, which would later become iconic, began to emerge during this time, giving the Bee Gees a distinctive and instantly recognizable sound. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Barry Gibb's life, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. We love seeing fans from all around the world. And don't forget to subscribe so you can keep following the stories behind the legends. By the early 1970s, the Bee Gees were no longer just a family band from Australia. They had become an international phenomenon. But for Barry, this was only the beginning. His natural drive, combined with his deep love for music, pushed the group to new creative heights. The groundwork had been laid, and soon the Bee Gees would transform from rising stars into cultural icons, defining not just a sound, but an entire era of music. As the creative leader of the Bee Gees, Barry Gibb's influence on popular music cannot be overstated. When people think of the Bee Gees, they often think of Barry's falsetto voice soaring over irresistible melodies. That falsetto, which started almost as an experiment in the early 1970s, became one of the most recognizable sounds in music history. It wasn't just a vocal style, it became a signature that defined an era, and it helped propel the group into the stratosphere of fame. The 1970s were a turning point, and it was Barry's vision that steered the Bee Gees into a new direction. When the band began leaning into soul and disco sounds, Barry was at the heart of the transformation. His songwriting genius produced tracks that would later become cultural landmarks. Songs like Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, and How Deep Is Your Love weren't just hits. They were anthems that defined the Saturday Night Fever era and the disco movement as a whole. These songs captured the pulse of the time, with lyrics that spoke to resilience, romance, and the joy of dancing away life's troubles. But Barry's reach went far beyond disco. His talent as a songwriter transcended genres, and he seemed to have an instinct for creating music that touched people no matter what style it was written in. While the Bee Gees dominated the charts, Barry was also quietly shaping the careers of other legendary artists. He collaborated with Barbra Streisand on the massively successful Guilty album, co-writing classics like Woman in Love and Guilty, which became some of the biggest hits of her career. With Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers, Barry penned the timeless duet Islands in the Stream, a country pop masterpiece that became a global sensation and remains one of the most beloved duets of all time. His pen also guided hits for Diana Ross, Dionne Warwick, and countless others. Each time, Barry seemed to mold his songwriting to fit the artist, while still leaving behind his unmistakable touch. This ability to adapt across pop, soul, R&B, country, and adult contemporary music showed just how versatile he truly was. Few musicians in history have written so many successful songs across so many different genres, and Barry's catalog of over 1,000 songs is a testament to that rare gift. The accolades followed naturally. Barry Gibb was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, honors that cemented his place among the greatest contributors to modern music. But perhaps more important than awards was the impact of his songs themselves. His music became part of people's lives, soundtracking weddings, heartbreaks, dance floors, and quiet moments of reflection. His songs were not just melodies on the radio, they were emotional experiences that millions of people connected with deeply. Even at the height of fame, Barry remained focused on the craft of songwriting. For him, writing was not about chasing hits, but about telling stories, evoking feelings, and creating something that would last. That dedication to the art of songwriting helped him stand apart from many of his contemporaries. He wasn't content with temporary chart success. He was building a legacy, brick by brick, lyric by lyric, note by note. By the time the 1970s came to a close, Barry Gibb was no longer just the leader of a successful band. He had become one of the most influential figures in global music. His voice, his vision, and his songs had defined a cultural moment and then expanded beyond it, proving that truly great music has no boundaries. It was a level of influence few artists would ever achieve, and for Barry it was still only the middle of his journey. The Bee Gees were never just a band. For Barry Gibb, they were his brothers before anything else. Their bond was forged in childhood, when music became the language that tied them together. Through every stage of their journey, from struggling young performers in Australia to global superstars filling arenas, the core of their identity was always family. The harmonies that defined their sound were more than just carefully arranged notes. They were the natural expression of brothers singing together, sharing not just blood, but a deep and unspoken understanding of one another. But with such closeness came an equally deep pain when tragedy struck. Over the years, Barry endured the unimaginable loss of each of his brothers. Maurice, the quiet anchor of the group, and Barry's constant partner in songwriting and production, died suddenly in 2003 at just 53 years old. The loss was devastating. Barry often spoke about how he felt like he had lost not just a brother, but a part of himself. Then came the passing of Robin in 2012 after a long battle with cancer. Robin's voice, filled with soul and emotion, had been the counterbalance to Barry's falsetto. His death was another crushing blow that left Barry feeling even more isolated. And yet, long before those tragedies, Barry had already endured the heartbreak of losing his youngest brother, Andy, in 1988. At just 30 years old, Andy's death was particularly painful because it came at the very beginning of his life, a life filled with potential and talent that was never fully realized. For Barry, losing Andy was like losing the baby of the family, the one they had all tried so hard to protect. That wound never truly healed, and it became a shadow that followed Barry through his later years. To survive these losses, Barry had to summon extraordinary resilience. It would have been easy to retreat from the world, to let grief silence his voice. But instead, he chose to carry the legacy of his brothers forward. Every time he stepped onto a stage, he wasn't just singing for himself, he was singing for Maurice, for Robin, and for Andy. Their presence lived on in every harmony, every lyric, and every performance. Barry became the keeper of their memory, ensuring that the music they had created together would never fade away. In interviews, Barry has often spoken with raw honesty about the loneliness of being the last surviving Gibb brother. He admitted that there were times when the silence around him felt unbearable, when he longed for the voices of his brothers to join in once more. Yet he also found strength in the knowledge that their music continued to touch people around the world. Concerts became a form of healing, a way to keep the spirit of his brothers alive by sharing what they had created together with new generations, who were just discovering the Bee Gees for the first time. This resilience became a hallmark of Barry's life. He showed the world that grief, no matter how heavy, could be transformed into something meaningful. By choosing to honor his brothers through music rather than surrender to despair, Barry became a symbol of perseverance. His story reminds us that even when life brings unimaginable pain, love and legacy can endure. For Barry Gibb, carrying the torch of the Bee Gees was not a burden, but a duty of love. It was his way of ensuring that his brothers' voices would never be silenced, and that the music they gave the world would live forever. Behind the flashing lights of fame and the endless tours that defined Barry Gibb's career, there was a quieter story. A story of love, family, and resilience that kept him grounded through the highs and lows of superstardom. Barry's first attempt at marriage came early in his life in 1966, when he was just beginning to taste success. But like so many young artists suddenly thrown into the whirlwind of fame, the pressures of constant travel, grueling schedules, and the temptations that surrounded the music industry made it nearly impossible for that relationship to survive. By 1970, that marriage had ended, leaving Barry with the realization that true stability could not be found unless it was built on something much deeper than youthful impulse. That same year, fate stepped in. During an appearance on the hit TV show Top of the Pops, Barry's life changed forever. It was there that he met Linda Gray, a radiant beauty who had once been crowned Miss Edinburgh. What began as a chance encounter quickly grew into something far more meaningful. Barry was immediately drawn not only to Linda's outward beauty, but also to her inner strength and grounded nature. In an industry often filled with fleeting connections and shallow encounters, Linda represented something real and lasting. On September 1, 1970, his 24th birthday, Barry married Linda, beginning a partnership that would defy the odds of celebrity marriages. While many of his peers saw their relationships crumble under the weight of fame, Barry and Linda built a union that stood strong for over 5 decades. Their love became a sanctuary, a place where Barry could step away from the chaos of the stage and simply be a husband and father. He often credits Linda with being the anchor of his life, the one who provided stability when everything else seemed uncertain. Together, Barry and Linda raised 5 children, creating a family life that was surprisingly ordinary given the extraordinary circumstances of his career. Their son Stephen followed in Barry's footsteps, becoming a musician himself, while their other children chose quieter paths outside of the spotlight. What mattered most to Barry was not that they lived in the shadow of his fame, but that they were raised with love, support, and a sense of normalcy that kept them grounded. As the years went on, Barry's role as a father expanded into something even more meaningful when he became a grandfather. With 7 grandchildren, Barry found a new kind of joy, one that reminded him of the innocence and magic of childhood. He often spoke of how his grandchildren kept him young at heart, how their laughter and curiosity gave him a sense of renewal, even after decades in the demanding world of music. In interviews, Barry has been clear. His family is his greatest achievement, far beyond the records sold or the awards earned. This stability at home also gave Barry the strength to endure the storms of his career and personal life. When he lost his brothers, it was Linda and their children who helped him navigate the grief. When the pressures of fame threatened to overwhelm him, it was family life that reminded him of what truly mattered. In many ways, Barry's marriage to Linda became the quiet backbone of his entire life story, a love story that stood firm while the world around them shifted. In an industry notorious for broken marriages and fractured families, Barry and Linda's union stands out as a rare example of devotion and endurance. Their marriage is a reminder that behind even the brightest stars, the most lasting legacy is often not found in fame or fortune, but in the love shared at home. For Barry, the Bee Gees may have given him global stardom, but his marriage and family gave him something far more precious: a life filled with love, laughter, and belonging. By the late 1970s, Barry Gibb's life was forever tied to America. Miami, Florida, became his sanctuary, a place where he and his family could enjoy a sense of privacy while still being close to the heartbeat of the music industry. Over the years, the Gibb family built a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the comforting normality that fame often strips away. Though Barry never lost his connection to the UK, America slowly became home, and in 2009, both Barry and his wife Linda officially became U.S. citizens, cementing their deep ties to the country that had embraced them. Miami itself proved to be more than just a residence. It became a hub of creativity. The Gibb estate was a gathering place, not just for family, but for friends and fellow musicians who found themselves drawn to Barry's openness and generosity. Among those friendships, none was more surprising or more enduring than Barry's bond with Michael Jackson. The king of pop often sought refuge from the relentless spotlight, and he found it in the Gibbs' Miami home. For Barry, welcoming Michael wasn't about celebrity, it was about friendship. He saw past the global superstar and into the person, a man who, despite his fame, carried a childlike innocence. Barry often spoke about Michael's playful nature during his stays. He remembered moments where Michael would run around the house, joke with the children, and lose himself in laughter. These were glimpses of Michael rarely seen by the public, moments where he wasn't burdened by the weight of expectation or controversy. Their connection extended beyond friendship into creativity. Michael and Barry shared a deep love of music, and their sessions together were filled with spontaneity and joy. They would sit together, experiment with melodies, and exchange ideas, two musical minds working in harmony. Barry described it as effortless, a meeting of talents where ego never got in the way. For Barry, those collaborations weren't about producing hits, but about the pure love of music that had driven both of them since childhood. What is perhaps most striking about Barry's recollections of Michael is what he chose not to focus on. During Michael's life, he was often surrounded by controversy, legal battles, and relentless public scrutiny. Yet Barry made it clear that those topics never entered their conversations. To him, Michael wasn't defined by the headlines. He was simply a friend, someone who sought comfort in the safety of the Gibb household. Barry respected his privacy, never judging, never pressing, simply offering companionship in a world that so often demanded too much from those in the spotlight. This approach reflects something profound about Barry himself. Throughout his life, whether with his brothers, his family, or his friendships, Barry valued loyalty and kindness above all else. Fame was fleeting, but trust and understanding were lasting. In Michael Jackson, he found a kindred spirit, another artist who knew the isolating weight of superstardom, but who also longed for simple human connection. Even after Michael's passing in 2009, Barry continued to speak fondly of their time together, often highlighting the playful, almost childlike qualities that the public rarely saw. For Barry, those memories were a reminder that even the most celebrated figures are, at their core, human, seeking friendship, laughter, and love like anyone else. Life in the United States gave Barry more than a home. It gave him a stage to share his music with the world and a community of friends who understood the unique challenges of fame. Yet at the heart of it all, what mattered most was the same as it had always been: family, loyalty, and the bonds of friendship that made the world a little less lonely. In 2006, Barry Gibb made a decision that spoke volumes about his deep respect for the legends who came before him. At the height of his success, Barry had the means to live anywhere in the world, but his heart was drawn to Tennessee, a place steeped in the traditions of country music and the legacy of some of America's greatest performers. It was there, on the banks of Old Hickory Lake, that Barry purchased one of the most iconic homes in music history. the residence of Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash. The house wasn't just a piece of property. It was hallowed ground, a place where decades of music, love, and history had taken root. Within its walls, Johnny Cash had written songs, welcomed friends, and lived out his love story with June. To Barry, this was more than a real estate purchase. It was a way of honoring one of his heroes, and he envisioned turning it into a creative retreat where he could draw inspiration from the same space that had nurtured the Man in Black. Barry's intentions were deeply personal. He wasn't buying the home as a trophy or a status symbol, but rather as a sanctuary. He dreamed of restoring it with care, preserving the essence of Johnny and June while also giving it new life. For Barry, it was almost a spiritual connection, a way of bridging his own journey as a songwriter with that of one of the greatest storytellers in American music. But fate had other plans. In 2007, during renovations, tragedy struck. A fire swept through the home, reducing the historic structure to ashes. The flames consumed not just wood and stone, but decades of memories and cultural significance. For Barry, the loss was devastating. He had hoped to honor Johnny Cash's legacy by breathing life back into the house, but instead, he found himself standing in the ruins of a dream. The fire was not just a physical loss, but an emotional one. It represented the fragility of history, the way even the most iconic landmarks can vanish in an instant. Barry later admitted that seeing the home destroyed was one of the most painful experiences of his life outside of family tragedy. In that moment, the weight of being both a fan and a caretaker of another artist's legacy became very real. Despite the heartbreak, Barry pressed forward. He eventually built a new house on the property, but the land never felt quite the same. For him, the magic was tied to the original home, the place where Johnny and June had laughed, sung, and lived. Though the new structure was beautiful, it could never replace what had been lost. By 2014, Barry made the difficult decision to sell the property. Letting go was bittersweet. It meant closing a chapter that he had once dreamed would be one of the most inspiring of his life. Yet in many ways, his time with the Cash property was not in vain. It reflected Barry's deep reverence for the history of music, his desire to preserve it, and his recognition that some legacies live on not in bricks and mortar, but in spirit and song. The loss of Johnny Cash's home stands as one of the more poignant episodes in Barry Gibb's journey. It was a reminder that even legends must face impermanence, and that sometimes the best way to honor those who came before us is not by holding on to the physical, but by keeping their music, their influence, and their stories alive. For Barry, the fire may have destroyed a house, but it could never erase the respect and admiration he carried for Johnny Cash and June Carter. Among the Gibb brothers, Andy was the youngest, born in 1958, more than a decade after Barry, Robin, and Maurice. By the time Andy was old enough to think seriously about music, his older brothers were already global stars. For most younger siblings, stepping into the shadow of such giants would be overwhelming. But Andy Gibb wasn't just the little brother. He was a natural-born star with a voice that Barry himself would later call the purest pop voice of them all. From the very beginning, Barry recognized that Andy had something extraordinary. His voice carried a clarity and smoothness that was different from the distinctive harmonies of the Bee Gees. It was effortless, bright, youthful, and filled with emotion that instantly connected with listeners. Barry took it upon himself not just to guide Andy, but to actively shape his career. For Barry, this wasn't simply about helping family, it was about giving the world a voice he knew deserved to be heard. When Andy was just 18 years old, Barry helped him record his debut single, I Just Want to Be Your Everything. It wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. The song soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1977, making Andy an international star virtually overnight, and the momentum didn't stop there. With Barry writing and producing, Andy followed with another massive hit, Shadow Dancing, which also topped the charts and became one of the defining pop songs of the era. Behind the scenes, Barry poured his energy into Andy's career as though it were his own. He coached him, wrote songs tailored to his unique voice, and used his own industry connections to make sure Andy had every chance to succeed. In interviews, Barry often spoke with pride about Andy's talent, saying that his younger brother had the kind of voice you couldn't teach. It was a gift. He truly believed Andy had the potential to not only match the Bee Gees' success, but to carve out a place of his own in the history of pop music. Andy's rise was meteoric. Within just a few years, he had become a teen idol, gracing magazine covers, selling out concerts, and enjoying the kind of fame that few artists ever achieve. His music resonated especially with young fans, who saw in him a new kind of pop star, fresh, approachable, and effortlessly charming. With his boyish good looks, soft-spoken charisma, and extraordinary vocal talent, Andy seemed destined for superstardom. For Barry, watching Andy's ascent was a mixture of joy and responsibility. He had helped craft the songs, but Andy's voice and natural stage presence made the magic come alive. Barry often said that Andy was born to be in the spotlight, and his early chart success seemed to prove it. Even as Barry and the Bee Gees were dominating the global music scene with the Saturday Night Fever era, Barry always made time to nurture Andy's career, making sure his younger brother wasn't left behind. This period marked one of the most hopeful and exciting chapters in the Gibb family's story. Andy wasn't just living his dream, he was doing it with the full support of his older brother, who had become his mentor, producer, and greatest champion. The future seemed limitless, with Andy poised to join the ranks of enduring pop icons. But as history would later reveal, fame brought with it challenges that Andy struggled to overcome. For the moment, though, his star was rising, his voice was shining, and Barry's pride in his little brother was boundless. It was a time of triumph, of music that captured hearts around the world, and of a family united in the joy of seeing one of their own step fully into the spotlight. For Andy Gibb, fame arrived like a lightning bolt, sudden, brilliant, and overwhelming. In just a few short years, he went from being Barry's kid brother with a dream to a global sensation. Magazine covers, sold-out shows, screaming fans, everything an aspiring musician could wish for was suddenly his. But behind the glitter of success, Andy was facing battles that no chart position could heal. Barry Gibb would later reflect with painful honesty that his younger brother's rise came too fast and at too young an age. Andy was only a teenager when his songs started topping the charts, and while his voice and charm made him an idol, emotionally, he was still searching for his place in the world. Barry often said that Andy was deeply vulnerable, a gentle soul who longed for love, acceptance, and validation in ways that fame could never truly provide. The music industry, however, is not a place that nurtures vulnerability. The same spotlight that lifted Andy up also exposed his insecurities. The demands of constant touring, relentless publicity, and the pressure to live up to expectations weighed heavily on him. While his brothers had each other to lean on during their early years of fame, Andy often faced the whirlwind alone. He was, in many ways, isolated, a young man thrust into an adult world where temptation and excess were everywhere. Barry has spoken about this painful contrast. On stage, Andy seemed unstoppable, exuding confidence and charm, but offstage he wrestled with feelings of loneliness and self-doubt. Fame, instead of silencing those doubts, amplified them. Surrounded by fans who adored him, Andy still craved something deeper: real connection, stability, and the kind of unconditional love that couldn't be found in applause or record sales. It was this emotional neediness, Barry admitted, that left Andy vulnerable to unhealthy influences. The people who entered his life during those years didn't always have his best interests at heart. Some enabled his insecurities rather than helping him face them. Others pulled him toward destructive habits that promised escape, but only deepened the cycle of pain. For a young man still learning who he was, the weight of stardom became both a blessing and a curse. Barry tried to guide his younger brother as best he could, stepping in as both mentor and protector. He reminded Andy that he was more than his fame, that his worth wasn't measured only by chart success or the approval of the public. But despite Barry's efforts, he couldn't shield Andy from every struggle. The pressures of celebrity life had a way of seeping through the cracks, finding the softest places in Andy's heart. Looking back, Barry often spoke with heartbreaking clarity. Andy wasn't ready for what came his way. He had the voice, the talent, and the charisma, but emotionally he was fragile. The very qualities that made his voice so pure, its innocence, its sincerity, its ability to reach straight into the listener's heart, were reflections of the tender, unguarded person he was inside. For Andy Gibb, fame was both the dream and the downfall. It gave him the world, but at a cost he was not prepared to bear. And for Barry, watching his little brother wrestle with those hidden battles was both inspiring and agonizing. The pride of seeing Andy's gifts shine, mixed with the fear of seeing how deeply the pressures of fame were cutting into him. Andy Gibb's extraordinary talent could not shield him from the harsh realities that often accompany early fame. Behind the smiles, hit records, and adoring fans, Andy was struggling silently with addiction and emotional turmoil. Barry Gibb, who had always been both mentor and older brother, later spoke more candidly than ever about this painful chapter of their family's life. Barry described Andy as a young man caught in a storm he couldn't control. Fame had opened doors, but it also brought temptations he was ill-equipped to resist. Drugs became a way to escape the pressures and insecurities that had been building since his meteoric rise. Despite Barry's guidance, the unwavering support of their family, and the love of his brothers, Andy found himself trapped in a cycle of dependency that he struggled to break. For Barry, witnessing Andy's decline was heart-wrenching. He would recall the sense of helplessness that comes when someone you love deeply is caught between their gifts and their demons. Every attempt to steer Andy back onto a safer path seemed temporary at best. Barry often questioned whether he could have done more, whether stronger intervention or tougher guidance might have made a difference. But addiction, he came to realize, is a battle no one can fight entirely for another person. The tragedy was compounded by the knowledge that Andy's vulnerability had always been intertwined with his genius. His emotional openness, which made his voice so compelling and his performances so heartfelt, also made him more susceptible to harm. The same qualities that captivated millions, his sincerity, his sensitivity, his need for love, left him exposed to the harshness of fame and the destructive allure of drugs. In 1988, just 5 days after his 30th birthday, Andy Gibb passed away. The news hit Barry and the entire family like a devastating thunderbolt. Beyond the loss of a brother, Barry faced the unbearable pain of remembering their last moments together. The brothers had quarreled shortly before Andy's death, a conflict that, in retrospect, haunted Barry for years. He carried the weight of unresolved words, wishing he could have turned back time, knowing there was no way to undo the heartbreak. Barry has spoken openly about the grief that followed, describing it as a wound that never fully healed. Losing Andy was more than losing a brother. It was losing a part of the family's shared history, a piece of the musical legacy they had all built together. The shadow of Andy's passing lingered over Barry's life, coloring his reflections on fame, family, and the fragility of human resilience. Yet even in the midst of tragedy, Barry continued to honor Andy's memory. He celebrated his brother's extraordinary talent, kept his music alive for fans old and new, and spoke candidly about the struggles Andy faced, raising awareness about the human cost of early stardom and addiction. In doing so, Barry turned grief into remembrance, ensuring that Andy's voice, both literal and emotional, would never be forgotten. The loss of Andy Gibb is a reminder of the complexities behind fame, the glittering success, the vulnerability, and the often unseen battles that come with being thrust into the spotlight too young. For Barry, it remains one of life's most profound sorrows, a testament to love, loss, and the enduring bond between brothers. At 78, Barry Gibb stands as the last surviving member of the legendary Bee Gees, a living testament to decades of musical triumph, personal triumphs, and heartbreak. With the passage of time, he has allowed himself to speak with an honesty and vulnerability that few in the public eye ever reveal. Among the subjects closest to his heart is the memory of his youngest brother, Andy, whose life and career were tragically cut short. Barry often describes Andy as a shining star, a phrase that captures both the brilliance of his musical talent and the warmth of his personality. He recalls Andy's laughter, his kindness, and the humor that could light up a room. From a young age, Andy's voice had a purity that seemed to reach directly into the hearts of listeners. For Barry, it was impossible to separate the music from the man. The joy Andy brought to the world and the love he gave to his family were inseparable from the notes he sang. Yet Barry acknowledges the cruel weight of fame that ultimately overwhelmed Andy. The pressures of stardom, the temptations of the industry, and the emotional vulnerabilities that fame magnified became burdens, too heavy to bear. Barry has often reflected on the cruel irony. The very qualities that made Andy extraordinary, his sensitivity, his openness, his talent, also made him fragile in ways the world didn't always understand. Even decades later, Andy's absence casts a silent shadow over Barry's life and career. Every performance, every studio session, and every lyric carries a subtle echo of what was lost. But rather than succumbing to sorrow, Barry chooses to honor Andy in the most meaningful way possible through music. He infuses each note and harmony with memory, ensuring that Andy's voice, spirit, and essence live on in every melody. Barry's reflections extend beyond grief. They are lessons about family, love, and resilience. He speaks about the enduring power of brotherhood, how the bond forged through shared experiences, music, and life cannot be erased even by death. Through his openness, Barry reminds audiences that memory and love are forms of immortality, ways to keep those we have lost alive in our hearts and actions. At this stage of his life, Barry has become not just a musical icon, but a custodian of legacy. He celebrates the Bee Gees' history, cherishes the successes and lessons of his career, and most importantly, keeps Andy's spirit alive for future generations. Every lyric he sings, every harmony he performs, and every story he tells carries the imprint of a brother he loved deeply and lost too soon. Barry's reflections at 78 are both bittersweet and inspiring. They reveal a man who has endured extraordinary joy and profound sorrow, yet continues to find meaning in music, family, and memory. In honoring Andy, Barry teaches that while life may be fleeting, love, brotherhood, and the power of memory endure forever, an enduring testament to the Gibb family's extraordinary journey. Barry's story shows the triumphs and struggles behind the music we love and the bonds that last beyond life itself. We'd love to hear from you. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you enjoyed this journey into Barry Gibb's life, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. At 78, Barry Gibb finally tells the truth about Andy Gibb.